Hey, everybody. This is Sean Deveney from Heavy.com. I'm with Steve Bulpett, our NBA insider here at Heavy, and it's a busy week. It's trade deadline week. If it's trade deadline week, Steve, inevitably I get a terrible, terrible cold, and all I want to do is curl up in bed. But but I'm here, and there's too much going on, too much excitement to be worried about being sick or anything like that. How are you here? 24 hours or so. I guess more like 30 hours or so ahead of the trade deadline here.
As usual, harried.
Harried.
A couple of phones working, making calls, answering calls. It's a pretty crazy time of the year. The Celtics. For all the years I covered them, seemed to be on the road during trade deadline time, and it was crazy. We'd be out on the West Coast, and I'd have to get up at 5:36 in the morning to start making calls to the East Coast, and that's after not getting any real sleep because you covered a game the night before or whatever. It's just it's a little bit better being based in one spot for the most part.
Right. Yeah. No, that's they always did seem to have that West Coast trip, right? And of course they moved the trade deadline up, so that helps. That'll be February 10th rather than after the All-Star game, which is when the Celtics would typically take that trip. But let's look at what the Celtics have done here. 6 games in a row they've won. I was just looking at the advanced stats. In those 6 games, 116.5 is their offensive rating. That's 9th in the NBA in that span. The defense, 95.4 points per 100 possessions. That is first by a long shot. The number 2 team is 103. So the defense right now is off the charts. And people can say, and we've seen them say, well, they haven't played anybody. That's okay. They're killing the teams that they should be, and they weren't doing that before. So this is obviously a much different team than what we saw a few months ago.
What I think what's more important than the numbers, but is just how they're playing the game. Are they moving the ball? Are they cutting offensively? All these things that their coaches have been begging them to do for a few years now, to be frank. And then defensively, we've seen it for stretches, but are they getting up defensively? Are they being aggressive defensively, not just kind of laying back as sitting ducks? They're forcing the offense to make a move. They're not just hanging there and trying to rotating late. They made one significant strategical move by keeping Al Horford closer to the bucket, keeping Rob Williams in a better position to handle defense, and I think that's worked out really well.
Takes advantage of Rob's athleticism a little bit, and kind of hides up the fact that Al's maybe a step slower than he used to be.
Well, but you also have to look at what Horford's role in that is that he gets to be the director, and in terms of a brain that you'd want back there, and a guy that can still play, just not as long as he used to be able to do. But Horford's been great in that role, and it's why, whereas maybe offensively you could come up with a better first group, defensively, which is the tone you want to set because it creates some transition buckets. Having that 5 with Horford and Rob Williams next to Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Marcus Smart, that's really helped them get off to better starts.
Yeah, much better. And mentioned 6-game winning streak. Also, 13-4 in their last 17. That's got them within 3 games of the number 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, which is crazy. I never really thought they'd have a chance to leap over some of those teams. It's now looking like I was dead wrong on that. But this is the day before the trade deadline. And so rather than look back at how well the Celtics have played, what everybody wants to know is what are they going to do next? That's one of the great things about the NBA is everybody's wondering who else is going to be on the team rather than who is already on the team. That's something that always rings true here at this time of year. Now, you wrote about Dennis Schroeder last night, and sort of you were clear to say that they're still likely, I would say almost certain to trade Dennis Schroeder between now and tomorrow afternoon. But the calculus has maybe changed a little bit. What are you hearing on that?
Well, there are voices within the organization, perhaps someone sitting on a bench that likes the idea of having Dennis Schroeder there. Obviously, the Celtics have leaned on Schroeder as part of the three-man crew that's the main group of guys coming off the bench. Schroeder, Josh Richardson, Grant Williams. And I think there's parts that would like to keep him there in that role, particularly if Marcus Smart were to go down or there'd be another injury somewhere else, and they could plug Schroeder in to play more meaningful minutes than he is now. The reason why their difference now is that they're asking for a reasonable asset back for Dennis Schroeder. And I think at the start of this process, they were thinking, okay, just let's move him and get off the money. And right. That was the goal. Now it's like they'd like to have something that might be an asset, next year or whatever. It doesn't have to be an asset for right now. Although, as we mentioned in the story, the reason why they've got more flexibility now is because Jaylen Brown not making All-Star takes away a likely bonus that was counting against their cap.
Right.
And drops
that bonus was $1 million, and they're 2.7 over the luxury tax. So that wipes out more than a third of what they need to do to get under that tax.
I think it was it 1.8 or something that was his bonus 1.8 for the All-Star thing, or
I think his bonus was 1 and they're 2.7. So now I believe they're 1.7 over. There's also a games played bonus in there, so they could be.
I think there might be even a little bit less than
even less
right now.
Okay.
So, but the point is, they could just trade off PJ Dozier and pay someone to take his contract. Do it that way, send cash out. But I think that it's still people in management, their pockets that would still like to move Schroeder, because getting off his money puts you under by a bunch and now leaves you open. So if you need to pick up someone in a buyout situation, you're more able to do that more.
Right. If they just barely get under, then the buyout stuff is off. But
I mean, for all intents and purposes.
Right. Nick, Nick Englander has a question. We'll get to you in a minute. Nick, one other thing I wanted to bring up, Steve, is there's been some talk about Al Horford. You mentioned sort of him in his role. Obviously, the big contract is there, $27 million this year, $26.5 next year. Not a hugely productive year in terms of numbers, but they like his leadership, of course. That's always the thing with Al. Is there a chance that they're beating the bushes to try to find something for Al at this point?
I think they'll listen if someone gives them something that they can't refuse. Yeah, but the important thing is next year I believe only $14 million or so is guaranteed next year for him, so they can get away from it. And as far as what a 35-year-old guy is going to do during the regular season, that's a little bit difficult to expect a ton over an interminable regular season. But I think you can see a guy like Al Horford becoming seriously more valuable in the playoffs, where you get to, as a team, hone in on your opponent, really scheme for them. It becomes more of a possession game, whereas the Celtics still will want to push the pace when they get into their defense and get to set it up. And I think that's where a Horford really would help you out. So, look, if I'm the Celtics, I'll listen to stuff, but I'm not overly crazy about something. If I'm another team, there are other teams out there that I think should be making a play for Al Horford. Charlotte's wanted a big man.
Yeah.
They wanted to get in on Miles Turner. That hasn't worked out, and obviously with Domantas Sabonis being traded to Sacramento, Indiana's left with not much in the middle, and Miles is kind of their guy right now. So, but there are teams that I think should be looking at Al Horford. I'm not sure if they're going to make a play because he does make a bunch of money. I apologize.
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned sort of the way he and Rob have interacted. I think that's been important in sort of eliminating some of the negatives that we've seen from Williams over the years. I think Al's been really important in that, and Rob, he's talked about it throughout the year about Al, how Al has helped him. So the number is big, and certainly if you could get off it does maybe free you up to do some other things. I just don't see that happening here.
What we have to take back too. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
So,
you gotta get somebody who
this
can
is
get
not a trade exception thing. That you'd be taking someone into. So yeah, it would require a lot of moving parts. And one thing we don't talk about much because it's hard to see. It's easy to look at two teams and say, is there a move to be made between these two teams? Is there something that fits player-wise and salary cap-wise? What's harder to see coming, and what is more likely if you're going to see some bigger names move, is that they're going to require a third team.
Yeah,
and those are kind of hard to see coming.
Yeah. All right, we've got a question from Nick, and I'm going to put it up here, Steve, because you'll like it.
No.
Steve, I have always enjoyed your Celtics reporting over the years. He's got a question about the team. Last summer there was all this chatter about Bradley Beal and his free agency and his relationship with Tatum. Teams that talk seems to have died down. Would the team still plan to go for him in the offseason? There's been all the talk of the third star. Definitely a conversation we'll have on Friday, I'd say, once the trade deadline passes. Obviously, nothing's going to happen between now and tomorrow afternoon on Bradley Beal is having the wrist surgery. But at the same time, he is going to be a free agent in the offseason. He has that player option. He can opt out. He has some control over what happens next. He could certainly, orchestrate a trade. So what do you think? Is there still a chance that Bradley Beal winds up in Boston?
Well, first of all, Nick, sucking up to a dopey writer, questionable in polite society, always a good move on a Facebook Live. I think that, a couple things are you have to look at there. Number one, he's having surgery. How does he come out of that? What do the Wizards try to do to make Beal want to keep the old promise of, hey, I want to stay here and be part of it here in DC? But yeah, I think absolutely that's something the Celtics will look at. Again, what is it going to cost you and how's that going to work out? But first of all, I'll go back to what's he going to look like health-wise at that point.
Yeah, I don't think they'll do it with Jaylen Brown, because the thing with Beal is you're also going to have to pay him, $240 million. Are the Celtics really going to be willing to do that for a guy who has had trouble staying healthy and has not really done much winning? You'd love to have him with Tatum. That'd be great. They're not going to give up Jaylen Brown for him. So it's going to be tough to do, and you've got to be willing to make that financial commitment. I think the deal, if Bradley Beal does wind up getting traded, I think the deal is going to surprise people because it's not going to. I don't think Washington's going to get a whole lot for him, at this point. Not because he's not talented, not because he can't score. First off, he went from 31 points per game last year down to 23 this year, so there's question marks there to begin with. But then also you've got to pay him this $240 million. So if there's a sign and trade to be had, I don't know. I don't know that Washington's going to get a whole lot back for him. Yeah,
isn't his contract? Yeah, I mean he's got a player option for next year, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not sure that
He's almost sure to opt out of that, and
yeah,
Washington will pay him the $5. What we could see is that Washington pays him the $5 and $240, and he does the Anthony Davis thing, which is after signing a contract, okay, now trade. That's we saw that with Anthony Davis. We saw that with Ben Simmons. Now he's not a Clutch Sports client, but he could certainly take a page out of their playbook. Let me go to Gary Webster here, Steve. Again, I'm Sean Deveney from Heavy.com Sports. This is Steve Bulpett.
One thing I would throw in with the Beal question is, the Celtics would have interest in him, and as far as paying him, they have to look at what they would be with him, and if they would be a contender type team, obviously would take more than just bringing in Bradley Beal. But if they thought that, then I think this ownership will spend. So I think the money isn't necessarily the issue. It's when you get it all together, is that a championship contending team? Right.
Yeah. And Jack makes a point here that that the likely option could be Beal opts in for a trade that'll have him lose a little bit of money. I don't think he's going to do that, Jack. I really don't, because he's had the health issues. He had a down year this year. If he can get the $240 million now, he's not going to risk playing 1 year and showing that maybe he doesn't have it anymore. He wants to leave a little mystery there and get that 240 now. I think that's how I think that's how he's going to play. But let's go to Gary, because Gary has a question here. And we talked a little bit about this before, Steve, is who has more value around the league, and conversely to the Celtics, Nesmith or Langford? I think it's a pretty good question. I think it's eye of the beholder a little bit. Obviously a lot of questions about Langford's ability to stay healthy, stay on the floor, and Nesmith's he just hasn't made shots.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think basketball people look at Nesmith and say, what would he be with opportunity? I think it is hard to come in cold and be hitting threes, but he gets to the hoop well. He is certainly energetic enough defensively and willing and all those things. Gets some good rebounds for a guy his size. And while he looks like he's crazy hustling all the time, Langford doesn't look that way, but seems to be in the right spot a lot.
Right,
you know what I mean? So it's kind of weird. But he's, you look at Romeo Langford as a guy who came in with kind of a hideous outside shot and has improved it significantly. And I know player personnel people look and say, okay, what's his graph look like? And, what are his capabilities? Then factor in how hard he works at stuff. So, yeah, I think there are people that do like Aaron Nesmith out there that think he's just being misused or not used. But Langford might have more value because he's, but then again, sorry to keep throwing these qualifiers in here, but Langford's had trouble staying healthy.
Yeah, right.
All along. So, that's an issue as well.
Yeah, and that was true in college. That's one of the reasons they were able to get him where they did. Jack does have a question about Schroeder, and that is what would be a reasonable return there? Is there anybody who stands out? There's been talk about Kobe White. I don't think the Bulls are going to give up Kobe White for Dennis Schroeder, not at 1 year. They could get something better there. Troy Brown Jr. has also been talked about. I think that's realistic. There was the DiVincenzo stuff. And again, that's realistic. Milwaukee kind of walked away from that. The Celtics wanted to add something else, apparently. So DiVincenzo, there's a chance that they could come back to that deal. That, if you're talking about that on Tuesday and you walk away from it, you can come back to it on Thursday. So I think DiVincenzo is possible. Two names
I think with Milwaukee, I think it was the Celtics that walked away when Milwaukee.
Oh, okay. Right. Yes, right. Okay. Yeah. So the Celtics were required to put in a draft pick or something like that, and right. Okay. Thank you for correcting me on that. Two guys that I think, and they've been talked about a little bit. I would like to see Josh Green from Dallas. Who's been sort of lightly used as number 18 pick a couple years ago. If they could get an asset like that, who's shown some promise. Hasn't really had much opportunity in Dallas. I'm not sure that the Mavericks are still in on Dennis Schroeder. They were at one point, but that's the kind of thing. Like if you could get a young player who's just not being used right now, and take a flyer on him, see what you got there. That to me would be the ideal situation for Schroeder.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what the Celtics are looking at, like a guy that inexpensive player, young, perhaps hasn't had an opportunity or much of an opportunity. They bring him in and get to look at him for the rest of the year, like on their practice floor, maybe in some games. It's kind of funny. I think if Aaron Nesmith were on a different team, he's the kind of guy the Celtics would trade Dennis Schroeder for.
Yes, right.
He's a young guy that hasn't seemed to do much, but let's see. We'll get him in here and see what how he looks to us.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll get another question in before we change subjects a little bit, look around the league a little bit. John Duke asks about what do you think of the feelings on the long term about the double big lineup? Where you've got Allen and Rob there. They tried that a lot last year. It was a pretty big failure. I think when you have an athletic guy like Rob and a smart big like Horford, you can do it. But is that really in today's NBA? Is that something you can do long term?
I think it can work with the right people. I mean, last year with Tristan Thompson, he was kind of in Rob's way for the stuff you wanted Rob to do. Al can step out. His shooting his percentages have been way down, but I don't think Al Horford has forgotten how to shoot. I think there's a good chance that comes back. And I also think that percentages will go up with the way the Celtics are playing right now. They're moving the ball. Guys are getting, they're getting penetration kickouts. Guys are getting squared up looks. And the fact remains that even though Al Horford has not been shooting well from the perimeter, you still have to guard him.
Yeah.
And that creates spacing. So I think the double bigs can work depending on the right combination. And for right now, they're using it to start games. And it's giving you the defensive start that you need. I'm not sure how much Al and Rob Williams are playing later on in games. But, I think for the start and for getting the Celtics on the right page, it's worked. And I want to apologize for having some issues with the
like I said, Steve,
the microwaved breakfast sandwich and cheese biscuit. I just want to horn in on the discussion.
Joachim McCanson, I hope I'm saying your name right, Joachim. Sorry if I'm not, but brings up Paul Millsap as sort of a veteran that could help on the paint and on the boards. I really do like the idea of bringing in Millsap on a buyout. I don't think you give up anything for him. I think the way they're heading is that's probably going to go to a buyout situation. I think Millsap will probably look around and maybe have some better options on the buyout market. But I think, he could be a buyout option for the Celtics if that winds up happening.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure what the fit's like, but I mean, again, I think there's other places he's much more likely to end up.
Right. All right, one more from Pedro here. Any truth to the Malik Beasley rumors? There was talk that the Celtics or that the Timberwolves had talked to the Celtics about Smart for Beasley. That went nowhere. And then there's been talk about Josh Richardson for Beasley. And Beasley's a guy I like. He can shoot. He's having a bad year. He had a lot of off-court stuff. So you've got to kind of take that into account. But 25 years old, has some upsides. Contract's not terrible. I think he makes 14.5 this year, 15 something next year. It's not terribly unreasonable. But we've talked about this before, Steve. They kind of like Josh Richardson, and you mentioned in your column last night that if you trade away Schroeder, you got to fill those backup point guard minutes. You've got Pritchard, of course, but Richardson's a guy who can do that as well.
Yeah, I think they'd look to Richardson at the point on kind of a stopgap basis if they were in a situation where they needed more size defensively. And they, so Richardson would fit that part. I think they'd try to get by. Hey, look, if guys are committed to moving the ball and cutting, then, having the traditional pure, orchestra conductor point guard is not a complete necessity.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we're going to change subjects just a little bit here, guys. I'm Sean Deveney from Heavy.com Sports. This is Steve Bulpett, our NBA insider. I wanted to kind of look around the league at a couple of things that are going to affect the Eastern Conference. One is this whole business of Philadelphia and Brooklyn. Maybe now earnestly talking, not maybe, definitely earnestly talking about a potential James Harden deal, which is a stunning turn of events. But at the same time, I got a lot of questions about it, Steve. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was the day before last, our story. I wrote about this.
Yes.
There are a lot of questions. First of all, the Nets believe that if they get their three guys together, that they'll be fine. And, I don't think they want to give up on that so easily. If Harden is telling them something internally that we don't hear, then that could all change, I'm sure. But I think there's a lot to consider. As a Nets source told me, they've got to look at, if they make this trade, which would essentially amount to Harden for Simmons, for James Harden for Ben Simmons, and what happens if the season ends and Kyrie, who has an option on next year, decides he wants to go elsewhere. Now, there's been no indication that the guy cautioned me. There's been no indication of that at all from Kyrie. But you never know with him. So what happens there? And you're sitting there with Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons on big money contracts, and what's around them. So you're kind of in a weird spot. So there's a lot of things to consider. If you look at it just in terms of style of play, it would seem to make both teams better. Ben Simmons, I think he's got incredible weaknesses for a guy who's you're paying all of that kind of money to. As one guy in one of the earliest stories that I did for Heavy mentioned, it's hard to give that much money to someone who's not a go-to guy. But if he's on the floor with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, then you don't care if he doesn't want to shoot from the outside. He's a guy that's going to move the ball, is happy doing that, plays good defense, will get you some boards, all those things. He is a very good, he'd be a superior complementary player. But, when you're looking at building a team and you're looking at 30 some odd $30 million for that sparkling complementary player, that's kind of hard to deal with, I think.
Yeah. And one other team I wanted to hit on, Steve, before we get out of here is, as I mentioned, the Celtics 3 games back of that number 3 seed. That 3 seed is currently Chicago, and they're in a world of hurt right now. I mean, they've got Alex Caruso out for 8 weeks. They're hoping maybe Patrick Williams can come back. We'll see about that. That's uncertain. Derek Jones Jr. is out. Lonzo Ball is out for a significant amount. They're not going to have their team together for another month, at least. And it's probably going to be a little bit longer than that. So they've got to get from point A to point B here. It's going to be difficult for them. I wonder if they do something tomorrow. A guy that I've heard connected to them going back to when Patrick Williams first got hurt was Marvin Bagley Jr. They don't want to give up anything for Marvin Bagley. They think he's going to be a buyout candidate. What do you think about that? Is he a good fit in Chicago? Obviously, they need a power forward, and can he really make a difference?
Well, what I've been hearing all along, and actually, frankly, not something you should be admitting to your editor, on something that's being recorded, is I was going to slide into the notes part at the bottom of last night's piece, is that everything points to the Chicago. Everyone is telling me Chicago is waiting for the buyout market. So we'll see how active they are in that. But I think the Bulls, in terms of what they've created with their system, with how guys are playing together, how guys are committed to playing with each other and fitting with each other. I think the Bulls believe that if they can get reasonably whole by the playoffs, they'll be able to ramp it up pretty quickly. Although right now it looks like they're tanking for the play-in. But a series of unfortunate events have befallen the Bulls, but I think they can gather themselves.
Yeah, that's like you say. That's the good news. Is this is happening in January and February rather than in the middle of March, when all of a sudden now you don't have time to get it together for the playoffs. So at least they've got that going for them.
True, absolutely.
Yeah. So that trade deadline tomorrow, 3:00. A lot of interesting things. Steve will be working the phones. I got to let him go so he can stop yammering at me and make some phone calls and and figure out what's going on out there. And then we'll have the bio market after that, Steve. I think that's going to be interesting to watch as well. You mentioned the Bulls and Millsap came up before. I think that's a possibility for him there. But definitely some interesting things going to take place between now and 3:00 tomorrow. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you, Steve, for being here. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye guys.